Imagine for a second that you are building the absolute coolest house on the block. I want you to really visualize this. We are talking about a place that literally stops traffic. The landscaping is Architectural Digest level. The paint colors, custom mixed, impossible to find at a hardware store. The vibe inside, it is unmatched.
It's the place to be, the center of the universe for that neighborhood.
Exactly. Everyone wants to come over. People are taking pictures of it from the sidewalk. Neighbors are subtly or, not so subtly copying your style. There is a line around the corner just to get into the living room party.
You're setting the entire tone.
You are, without a doubt, the talk of the town. You have created the culture of the entire neighborhood.
It sounds like a fantastic position to be in. I mean, that's influence, right?
It does, right?
Whoa.
It feels like winning. It feels like power. Until you realize one tiny, devastating detail.
Which is?
You don't own the deed.
Ouch.
You're just renting.
Wow, okay. That hits hard.
And the landlord. He loves that you made the place famous. He loves that the property value just skyrocketed because of your hard work, your taste, your social capital. But at the end of the day, when the building is sold, he collects the equity.
And you just get the memory.
You just collect the likes on social media, maybe a few nice photos.
That is a very potent and frankly very painful metaphor, but it captures the exact essence of what we are unpacking today.
We are looking at a phenomenon that I think confuses a lot of people. It's this tension between visibility and value. Specifically, why Black cultural output, music, fashion, slang, digital trends, it just dominates the global stage. Yet, Black ownership of the assets behind that culture, well, the math doesn't math.
We're calling it rented power.
Rented power. That's the thesis for this deep dive. Influence is visible, it's viral, it's loud, but ownership, that's where the actual leverage lives.
Yeah.
And we have a massive stack of research to get through today.
Yeah, this isn't just a hype check. We have the data. We're looking at housing statistics from places like Redfin and the Urban Institute to really understand the foundation of this issue.
The foundation of the house itself.
Exactly. And then we have some really eye-opening, maybe even controversial reports on the whole myth of buying power from researchers like Dr. Jared Ball.
And I'm really excited to get into that part because that's a number we hear thrown around all the time.
Mm-hmm. And then we have a fascinating forward-looking analysis from a source called Black Status that breaks down the future of the Atlanta economy, which is really a microcosm for this whole discussion.
So we're going to cover a lot of ground. We're going to look at the foundation of this house, which is that persistent home ownership gap. We're going to deconstruct the valuation gap in business. And then we're going to look forward at how the game is changing from what they call labor wealth. Getting paid to be the star.
To IP wealth.
To IP wealth, which is owning the digital assets themselves.
It's a huge shift from being the content to owning the platform.
So grab your shovel, because we are breaking ground. Let's start with what we're calling the visibility paradox.
Right. So to really understand rented power, you first have to acknowledge just how influential Black culture is. And I don't mean just saying it's cool. I mean looking at the ROI, the return on investment from a data perspective.
There's actual data on this.
Oh, yeah. We have a study here from Urban One and Nielsen. They call it the Cultural ROI Study. They surveyed thousands of consumers.
And what did they find? What are the numbers?
Staggering. 79% of U.S. consumers acknowledge that Black Americans have a significant cultural influence.
79%.
Yeah.
So that's basically 8 out of 10 people in this country saying, yes, we see this impact. It's not a niche thing.
Not at all. It's ubiquitous. You can't really go anywhere without seeing it. And when you dig into the specifics, over half of consumers see this impact explicitly in music, fashion, food, and even politics.
It's the water we're all swimming in.
It really is. And I saw a stat in that same report that really stuck out to me regarding the younger generations. It said nearly 80% of Gen Z and millennials say they personally benefit from Black culture representation.
That's an interesting phrase, personally benefit. What does that even mean?
It's an interesting phrase, isn't it? It implies that the cool factor is a transferable asset, something you can sort of adopt or consume to enhance your own social standing.
Right. And brands know this. They are absolutely desperate for it.
They are. The Nielsen report notes that 67% of Black consumers pay more attention to ads that reflect their culture. Brands know that Black culture is the engine of cool. They've known it for decades. But here is the disconnect, and it is the core of our discussion today.
Yep.
Being the blueprint isn't the same as being the architect.
Or the developer. The developer gets paid when the building is sold. The architect gets a fee, maybe. The blueprint is just, well, it's just a drawing.
Precisely. And The Urban One study actually uses that exact word. They call Black influence the blueprint. But if you look at the flow of capital versus the flow of culture, they are moving in opposite directions.
That's so.
Culture flows out, it's consumed globally, and generates massive value for platforms and corporations. But the equity, the ownership of the platforms, the record labels, the movie studios, the distribution houses, that capital tends to consolidate elsewhere.
It's like cultural velocity versus ownership velocity.
Say more about that. I like that.
Well, one is moving at the speed of light. A TikTok trend can travel the globe in literally seconds. But the ownership velocity, the rate at which equity is built in the community that created the trend, is glacial. It barely moves.
That's a great way to put it. Velocity without accumulation. And this isn't just an abstract feeling. We see this in the music industry. Hip-hop is arguably the most dominant genre globally. It generates billions. But if you look at the cap tables of the major labels or who owns the publishing rights to the most sampled catalogs,
The diversity falls off a cliff.
it falls off a cliff. It's not even close.
So if the culture is the decoration of the house, the music playing in the living room, the art on the walls, let's look at the foundation. Because in the U.S. economy, the bedrock of wealth isn't really your sneaker deal or your viral TikTok.
No.
It's your literal house.
It is. And this is Economics 101, but it bears repeating because we often get distracted by the flashy stuff. Homeownership accounts for, roughly 68% of total household net worth for the average American family.
Nearly 70%. That is the vast majority of the pie.
Yes. If you don't own your home, you are missing out on the primary vehicle for wealth accumulation in this country. It's the FOST savings account. It's the hedge against inflation. It's the collateral for loans.
It's the thing you leave to your children so they don't start from zero.
That's the generational component. It's everything.
And this is where the rented power concept stops being a metaphor and gets very, very real. We have data here from Redfin and the Mortgage Point that is, honestly, it's pretty shocking to read.
It's a huge reality check. The Black homeownership rate is currently hovering around 44%. Specifically, some recent quarters put it at 43.9%.
Okay, 44%.
Now, compare that to white households, where the rate is over 72%.
72. Wow, so we're talking almost 30 percentage points. That is a massive gap.
It is. It's a chasm. But here is the kicker, the part that really hurts when you look at the historical trend lines.
Okay.
That gap of nearly 30 points, it's wider now than it was in 1960.
Wait, hold on. Let's pause on that. You said 1960.
Yes, 1960.
That's before the Fair Housing Act. That's before the Civil Rights Act of 1968. That's before we legally ended segregation in housing policies. You're telling me we have gone backward.
In terms of the relative gap, yes, the absolute numbers have gone up for everyone, but the gap between Black and white homeownership has widened. We have legally ended explicit discrimination. You can't put a sign in the window saying whites only anymore, but the economic outcome has actually diverged.
And that has to have generational consequences. We have data from the Federal Reserve, I see it here in the notes, via the Dead Alice Weekly, that paints a stark picture of net worth.
It's the direct result. Hit me with the numbers.
The median white family net worth exceeds $285,000.
$285. Okay.
The median Black family net worth, about $45,000.
$45,000. So that's more than a 6x difference.
It is. And your point is that this is almost entirely driven by that homeownership gap.
It's the main engine of the disparity. Because when you own a home, you have an asset that appreciates over time, hopefully. You can borrow against it to start a business. You can use it to pay for college. You can pass it down to your kids so they don't start at zero.
Whereas when you rent, you're just paying someone else's mortgage. You're actively building someone else's equity every single month.
100%.
So how did we get here? I know we can't do a whole history lesson. This isn't a history deep dive, but we have to touch on the why. Because there's a narrative out there that maybe people just, don't want to buy homes. Or they aren't saving enough. Or they're buying too much avocado toast.
No, absolutely not. That is a dangerous and frankly a lazy misconception. The Urban Institute and other sources, they often use this metaphor of a relay race, where one team started running 50 years before the other team was even allowed on the track.
And you have to start with the GI Bill.
You have to talk about the GI Bill. Post-World War II, it was the engine of the American middle class.
Right.
The U.S. government effectively subsidized the creation of the white middle class. They offered low-interest, often zero down payment mortgages to veterans. It was a massive wealth transfer program.
One of the biggest in history.
But because of redlining, The practice of literally drawing red lines around Black neighborhoods on maps to deem them hazardous for investment. Black veterans were systematically denied these loans. They fought in the same war, came home to the same country, but were locked out of its signature wealth building program.
So you have generations of white families who bought homes in the suburbs in the 1950s for, what, $8,000 or $10,000?
Or less in some cases, and those homes exploded in value over the next 40, 50, 60 years. That wealth was passed down to the baby boomers and then to the millennials. That is the down payment for the next generation's house. That is the bank of mom and dad that you hear about.
And Black families were locked out of that initial equity boom. They were still paying rent in neighborhoods that were being systematically disinvested in.
Exactly. It's the original sin, so to speak, of the racial wealth gap. But, and this is crucial because I don't want listeners to think this is just ancient history. It's still happening right now. The mechanisms have just changed. They've gotten more sophisticated.
How so? What does that look like today?
We have research from Georgia Tech that highlights a very modern barrier of institutional investors.
You mean the big hedge funds and private equity firms buying up houses? I see the "we buy homes for cash" signs everywhere, but I always thought that was just local flippers.
It's flippers on steroids. It's industrial scale. The Georgia Tech study shows that large corporate investors are aggressively buying up single-family homes, often by the thousands.
And are they just buying them anywhere?
No, and this is the key part. They aren't buying them randomly. The data shows they are specifically targeting neighborhoods that would typically be the entry point for the Black middle class.
Why those neighborhoods specifically? What's the strategy?
Because the press points are lower relative to the rent they can charge, so the yield is higher. The return on investment is better. And they are outbidding families with all-cash offers, closing in days.
A regular family can't compete with that.
You can't. A regular family needs a mortgage contingency and inspection time to move. A hedge fund just wires the money, no questions asked. They can overpay by $10,000, $20,000, and it doesn't matter because they're playing a long game.
So they are literally converting an ownership opportunity into a permanent rental unit. The for sale sign becomes a for rent sign forever.
Correct. They are turning the neighborhood into a rented power dynamic at scale. You can live there, you can decorate the house, you can make the neighborhood cool, but you will never own it. The equity flows to a boardroom in New York or London or somewhere else entirely.
It's incredibly frustrating. It feels like the rules are just different. But let's say you beat the odds. You save up, you get the loan, you outbid the hedge fund, you get the house. You're in the 44%. Is the playing field level then?
I wish I could say yes, I really do. But even when Black families do buy homes, there is what researchers at Brookings call a tax on the asset. It's a penalty for owning while Black.
This was the part of the research notes that made me just scratch my head. How can you have a tax on the asset that works against you specifically? It sounds illegal.
It's not an official tax, of course. It's a two-pronged problem: appraisal bias and what they call the property tax paradox.
Okay, let's break those down. Appraisal bias first.
First, data from Brookings shows that homes in majority Black neighborhoods are systematically undervalued. They call it devaluation. The cumulative loss in equity from this undervaluation is estimated at $162 billion.
$162 billion. That's a huge number. So let me understand this. My house, with the exact same square footage, the same granite countertops, and the same school district as a house across town in a white neighborhood, is just worth less because it's in a Black neighborhood.
Yes. The comparables, the other houses sold nearby that appraisers use to determine value, drag your value down due to historical bias and current perception.
Wow.
But here's the paradox. This is the part that's truly maddening. While the market value, what you can sell it for, is suppressed, the tax assessment often isn't.
Wait, what? So the taxman thinks it's worth more?
Relatively, yes. The same Brookings research indicates that Black homeowners pay 10% to 13% more in property taxes relative to their home's actual value compared to white homeowners.
How is that even possible? Is there a different tax rate? I don't understand the mechanics of that.
No, the weight is the same. It's usually because of how appeals work and how assessments lag. In wealthier, often whiter neighborhoods, values rise very fast, but the county assessments often lag behind, effectively giving those homeowners a tax break on their new, higher value.
Okay.
In Black neighborhoods where values might be stagnant or suppressed, the assessment stays high relative to the low market value. Plus, wealthier homeowners are more likely to have the time and resources to appeal their tax assessments and win.
So, let me get this straight. You pay more to own it, but it's worth less when you try to sell it or borrow against it.
That is the definition of a wealth stripping mechanism. It's like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. It makes it harder to build equity, even when you do everything right. You bought the house, you pay your taxes, but the asset itself is leaking value.
Okay, so the housing market is shaky. It's riddled with these structural holes. But then we turn on the TV or read business articles and we see these headlines about black buying power. I feel like every year there's a new report saying black consumers have trillions in buying power. It's always framed as a victory lap.
It's absolutely presented as a victory lap. It's presented as proof of progress, of economic might.
But our sources today are saying, maybe put the confetti away.
This is one of the most misunderstood economic metrics in America. We have a source here, a breakdown from Essence that's citing Nielsen data, and it projects black buying power will top $2 trillion by 2026.
$2 trillion. That is a GDP-sized number. If that were a country, it would be in the top tier of global economies. That sounds like massive leverage.
It sounds like wealth. It's designed to sound like wealth.
Yeah.
But it isn't. And we really need to bring in the analysis from the Crusader, and particularly Dr. Jared Ball, who has written extensively on this. His argument is simple, and it's devastating.
What is it?
Black spending is not black wealth.
Okay, let's unpack that distinction, because to the average person, if I can spend $1 trillion, I must be rich. What is the difference between buying power and wealth?
It's the most important distinction in all of this. Wealth is what you keep. It's what you own. It's assets minus debts. It's your net worth. It's the stocks, the bonds, the real estate, the businesses you own.
It's the stuff that works for you while you sleep.
Exactly. Buying power or purchasing power is simply your capacity to consume. It's the money flowing through your hands, not staying in them.
Flows through your hands and goes where?
Usually directly into the hands of corporations that you do not own. It's a measure of how much money you give to other people.
So having $2 trillion in buying power just means you are a really, really good customer for Nike, for Apple, for Toyota.
Exactly. Dr. Ball argues that this metric was created by the marketing industry for the marketing industry. It's a B2B metric. It's a signal to advertisers saying, hey, target this demographic. They have cash to spend on sneakers, on cars, on luxury goods. It is not an indicator of the community's economic health. It's essentially measuring how efficiently money can be extracted from a community.
That's a crucial distinction. It's a target on your back, not a shield in your hand. That reframes everything.
It does. And in fact, Dr. Ball points out something really counterintuitive. High consumption can sometimes point to a lack of wealth-building assets.
How so? That seems completely backwards.
Think about it. If you are locked out of the housing market because of the appraisal bias and institutional investors we just discussed, and maybe you don't trust the stock market because of historical exclusion or lack of knowledge, where does your disposable income go?
Into stuff. Cars, clothes, experiences.
It goes into consumables. It goes into lifestyle. If you can't save for a $50,000 down payment because the target keeps moving, or because you get denied for the loan, you might as well buy the $200 sneakers or the nice dinner. It's an accessible form of status.
It's the lipstick effect, but applied to an entire demographic. You buy the attainable luxury because the appreciative asset, the house, is out of reach.
Precisely. And this gets to another popular idea I've heard, often from within the community, that if Black people just pooled their money and kept it in the community, they'd be a wealthy nation. You hear this, keep the dollar black for 24 hours, that sort of thing.
I've heard that a million times. It sounds logical on the surface. Is that wrong?
The expert analysis suggests it's mathematically impossible as a comprehensive wealth-building strategy.
Why?
Because that $2 trillion is largely wage income, not capital returns. You spend wages to live. You have to pay rent to a landlord you probably don't know. You have to buy groceries. You have to put gas in the car. You have to pay your electricity bill.
And who owns the electric company? Who owns the gas station? Who owns the national supermarket chain?
Exactly. Those core industries, energy, agriculture, real estate, banking, are not owned by the community. You can't just pool rent money into a sovereign wealth fund. The landlord needs his check. The money has to leave because the community doesn't own the supply chain of basic necessities.
So the money has to leave. It has no choice. The system is designed for it to exit. It's a sieve, not a bowl.
Right. You can't boycott your way to ownership if you don't own the alternative.
That makes so much sense. But there has to be some leverage there, right? You are spending $2 trillion. Brands should at least respect you. You're keeping the lights on for some of these companies.
You would think. And they want the money. But the Nielsen data shows a real disconnect there, too. 71% of Black audiences feel misrepresented in media.
71%. So almost three-quarters feel like they aren't being seen accurately.
Correct. And yet 70% say they will stop buying from brands that devalue their community.
That seems contradictory. If they're willing to stop buying, why do they still feel so misrepresented? Wouldn't brands be terrified of losing them?
Because the brands are doing the bare minimum. It's performative. They want the transaction. They want their slice of that $2 trillion pie, but they aren't necessarily doing the deep work to build equity or partnership.
So they'll put a black face in the ad, maybe for Black History Month.
Sure, but is there a Black person in the boardroom making decisions? Is the advertising budget being spent with Black-owned media companies? Are they investing in venture funds that support Black founders? Usually not.
They want the revenue, not the relationship. They want the cool, but they don't want the collaboration or the control.
Correct. And that brings us right back to our theme, rented power. We are renting the brands, renting the style, but not owning the company.
Okay, so housing is tough. Buying power is a bit of a mirage. Let's talk about business. Because if you can't buy wealth through housing, maybe you can build it. The entrepreneurial spirit is definitely there. I feel like everyone has a side hustle, a startup idea, or a consulting gig these days.
The spirit is absolutely there, and the data backs that up. Pew Research data shows that more than 1 in 5 Black adults say owning a business is essential to their definition of financial success. That is higher than the general population.
So the desire is strong.
Very strong. And we've seen a surge in Black business ownership recently. Some data from the NCRC shows a doubling of business assets in recent years.
That sounds like good news. Finally, a clear win.
It is good news, but, and I hate to be the bearer of caveats today, but it's important, there is a major structural issue underneath that growth.
And what's that?
Most of these businesses, about 96% of them, are what we call non-employer firms.
A non-employer. So solopreneurs. It's a one-person show.
Right. It's just one person grinding, no employees, no real scale yet. It's a job you created for yourself, which is admirable, but it's not necessarily an enterprise that builds equity you can sell later for a big payout.
And this leads us to a fascinating concept I found in our research from the Cleveland Fed. They call it survival bias. This blew my mind because it sounded like a compliment at first, but then you realize what it implies.
It's a study that completely turns the usual narrative on its head. Usually we hear that Black businesses fail at higher rates, and that's statistically true, primarily due to capital constraints. But the Cleveland Fed looked at the businesses that do survive.
The ones that make it past the first few years.
Exactly. And they found that Black businesses that survive actually have higher rates of return than surviving white businesses.
Wait, really? So if a Black business survives, it's actually more profitable than a comparable white business?
Yes. But think about why that might be.
I'm guessing it's not because they have some secret magic formula.
No. It's because the environment is so harsh that only the absolute strongest, most resilient, most undeniably profitable businesses survive. It's an extreme filter. Because Black entrepreneurs lack that cushion. The family wealth, the home equity, the easy access to bank loans we talked about. The businesses that are just okay or average fail almost immediately.
They can't weather a bad month, one big unexpected expense, and they're done.
Right. If the main refrigerator in the restaurant breaks or a big client pays their invoice 60 days late, they go under. A white entrepreneur who historically has more access to that bank of mom and dad or a line of credit can keep a mediocre business afloat much longer. They can inject cash to fix the fridge. They can float the payroll.
That is a wild way to think about it. It's like, do you know that story with the World War II planes?
The Abraham Wald story. Yes, I do.
For the listener.
Yeah.
The military looked at the planes coming back from battle, and they saw they had bullet holes all over the wings and the tail, and they said, okay, we need to put more armor on the wings and tail.
Yeah.
But the statistician said, no, put armor where the holes aren't.
Because the planes that got hit in the engine or the cockpit didn't come back, you're only seeing the survivors.
Exactly. The survivors are the ones we see. In this case, the surviving Black businesses we see are the ones that somehow managed to not get hit in the engine. They are exceptional by definition.
It's a perfect analogy, and the pothole or the bullet in business is usually a liquidity shock, and the armor is capital, specifically home equity. This brings us full circle to section 1.
Right.
Brookings data shows that startup capital is tightly tied to home equity. Most people fund their first business by taking a second mortgage or a habilosi, a home equity line of credit.
It's a vicious cycle. You can't buy a house, so you don't have equity. You
Right.
don't have equity, so you can't get a business loan or self-fund. You can't start the business, so you can't build the wealth to buy the house.
And that is why the rented power dynamic persists. The cycle reinforces itself across generations. But, and this is where we need to pivot, there are people realizing this and changing the strategy entirely. They're trying to break the cycle.
Yes. This is the part I'm excited about. We're moving from just diagnosing the problem to looking at the new blueprint. We have this fascinating transcript from a YouTube channel called Black Status. They did a deep dive on the Atlanta economy, specifically looking at 2026 and beyond.
Atlanta is a great case study because it's often called the Black Mecca, a center for Black culture and business. But the Black status analysis argues that Atlanta is shifting, or at least it needs to shift, from labor wealth to IP wealth.
Break that down for us. Labor versus IP. This feels like the key to the whole episode.
Okay, think about the film industry. Atlanta is huge for filming movies. Marvel films there, Tyler Perry studios are there, Stranger Things is filmed there. But traditionally, being a filming location is labor wealth.
You mean the local crew, the grips, the electricians, the extras.
Yes. You are getting paid to perform a service or to build the set or to cater the lunch or to drive the trucks. Even if you are the star actor, you are essentially labor in the sense that you are trading your time for money. Once the movie wraps, the checks stop.
Unless you have points on the back end, which is incredibly rare for most people on a set.
Exactly. But IP wealth, intellectual property wealth, is owning the asset that keeps generating revenue. The Black Status Breakdown talks about a pivot to virtual production studios.
This is the high-tech stuff, the stuff they use on The Mandalorian.
Right. We're talking about owning the Unreal Engine technology, the massive LED walls that replace green screens. If you own the digital studio, you aren't just renting out physical space for a few months. You own the digital assets, the virtual backgrounds, the 3D character models, the lighting rigs, and the software.
So instead of just being the actor in the scene, you own the digital studio where the scene is created. You own the pixels themselves.
Owning the pixels, not just the people. That's the phrase they used. When you own the digital asset, you get paid every time it's streamed, licensed, or used in a video game 20 years from now. That's equity. That's control. It scales infinitely without you having to be there physically.
And this isn't just about movies. The analysis went into some sectors I really didn't expect, like drones.
The drone economy. This is fascinating. The argument is, don't just focus on driving the delivery truck. That's labor. That's the old economy. By 2026 and certainly beyond, a lot of last-mile delivery will be autonomous.
So the job of delivery driver might not even exist in the same way.
Or it'll be drastically changed. So the opportunity isn't to be the drone operator, which is still labor. It's to own the logistical grid. Own the AI software that controls the drone fleet. Own the data on the most efficient routes.
Because in 2026, the wealth isn't in moving the box. It's in the algorithm that tells all the boxes where to go.
Precisely. And they also touched on biotech. This is an area where rented power can be a matter of life and death. Historically, big pharma has often ignored conditions that disproportionately affect Black populations.
You're talking about things like sickle cell anemia or uterine fibroids.
Right. For decades, they didn't see a big enough profit margin, or the total addressable market wasn't considered valuable enough to pour billions into R&D. But now, there is a wave of Black-led investment in personalized medicine. And this isn't charity. This is high-stakes capitalism.
How so? What's the play?
If you fund the research and own the patent for a new effective fibroids treatment or a gene therapy for sickle cell, you are capturing a massive, underserved global market. You own the cure. You aren't just the pharmacist dispensing pills from a big company. You hold the IP on the molecule itself.
I love that framing. Own the cure. That's real power. And then there was my favorite part of the Black Status report, the part about the boring businesses.
Yes, AI for the mundane. This is so important.
Everyone wants to build the next ChatGPT, or everyone wants to be the next big tech visionary. But this analysis says, no, that game is already locked up by Microsoft and Google and the giants. The real opportunity is elsewhere.
The real opportunity is to build the AI for plumbing logistics or AI for hair salon scheduling.
Exactly. This is called vertical SaaS, software as a service for a specific industry. The report argues that because Black entrepreneurs are overrepresented in certain service industries, beauty, barbershops, logistics, home healthcare, they have the deep domain expertise.
They know the pain points inside and out, better than a generic coder in Silicon Valley ever could.
Exactly. So if you know everything about how a barbershop runs, the chaotic scheduling, the inventory for products, the client management, don't just open 10 barbershops. Build the software that manages 10 1,000 barbershops.
So you license the software to every barber in the country for a monthly fee.
That is where the billions are. Saw's valuations are massive compared to mortar valuations,
Right.
and that is the perfect example of the shift from influence, being the cool barber who cuts the celebrity's hair, to control owning the platform the entire industry runs on.
It sounds so promising, but it brings us to a darker side of technology, because as much as we talk about owning the platform, right now, most creators are just renting space on TikTok or Instagram. And this is where the rented power conspiracy, or rather the reality of it, comes into sharp focus in the digital age.
I use the word conspiracy lightly, but it can feel like one sometimes. You build a following, you play by the rules, you create the culture on the platform, and then one day you wake up and you're shadow banned. Your reach is gone.
It's easy to feel like there's a shadowy group of people in a room plotting to keep you down, but the reality is often more mundane and more insidious. It's what we call systemic inertia and algorithmic bias.
We have a report from the Joint Center on AI and digital assets. It talks about how deregulation might look like freedom on the surface, but it can actually be a trap.
Right. Especially in the crypto and AI space, there's this huge push for freedom, decentralization, no oversight. It sounds very appealing, very libertarian. But the Joint Center warns that without guardrails, vulnerable communities are always the first to get hit with predatory fees, outright fraud, and the inevitable market collapse.
We saw this with the crypto crash a few years ago. Who got hurt the most?
It was often late adopters from minority communities who were sold the dream of catching up quickly. They were told it was their chance to leapfrog the traditional system. They entered the market just as the early wealthy investors, the whales, were cashing out.
And then there's the platform risk we just mentioned. If you build your entire business on Instagram, you're an influencer, you sell products through the app, and then one day, Mark Zuckerberg decides to change the algorithm.
You're evicted. Your reach drops 90% overnight. You have no recourse, no one to appeal to. That is the very definition of rented power. If you don't own the customer data, the email list, the phone numbers, and you don't own the platform itself, you are subject to the whims of the landlord. In the digital age, the landlord is the algorithm.
So we've covered a lot of ground. We've talked about the housing gap, the myth of buying power, the need for capital in business, and this crucial shift from labor to IP. Now let's talk solutions, because we aren't here to just admire the problem. We want to know, what are the blueprints for the new house, the one we can actually own?
We need to look at both policy and private action. It's a two-pronged approach. We can't just hustle our way out of deep structural problems, but we also can't just sit back and wait for the government to fix everything.
Let's start on the policy side. What are some of the big ideas coming from places like the Urban Institute and the NCRC?
One interesting idea that's gaining traction is baby bonds.
I've heard of this. It sounds like something from a sci-fi utopia, but what is it in practice?
It's actually very practical. The idea is a publicly funded trust account that's given to every child at birth. The amount deposited would depend on the wealth of the family. So a child born into a low-wealth family gets a much larger initial deposit from the government than a child from a wealthy family.
And it just sits there and grows until they are 18.
Exactly. It's invested and it grows with compound interest. By the time that child becomes an adult, they have access to a substantial sum, maybe $40,000 or $50,000.
There's the cushion, there's the startup capital.
Precisely. It provides the capital for a down payment on a house or a seed round for a new business. It's about manufacturing intergenerational wealth where it was historically denied. It doesn't fix everything, but it levels the starting line for the relay race we talked about earlier.
And I assume reforming those appraisal systems is huge too. We need to stop that tax on the asset we talked about earlier.
Absolutely. The automated valuation models, the AVMs that Zillow and others use, they need to be audited for racial bias. And the human element of appraising needs more diversity and more accountability.
But the private sector solutions are just as interesting to me. The Black Status Analysis talks about something called the educational industrial complex.
Which sounds a little scary, but break down what they mean by it.
It's essentially the privatization of education within the community. But not just any school. It's about building high-tech, high-performing charter schools in Black neighborhoods that focus intensely on coding, robotics, and financial literacy from a young age.
It's a form of vertical integration, but for talent.
Exactly. So instead of waiting for the public school system to catch up, you build a direct pipeline of talent that stays in the city. You train the kids who live on the block to build the AI for plumbing logistics that we just discussed.
And importantly, looking at it from a real estate perspective, when you have a top-tier, high-demand school what happens to the property values of the homes around it?
They skyrocket every time.
Right. So if the community owns the land and builds the school, they capture that value increase themselves. It's a way of gentrifying your own community for your own benefit, rather than being displaced by outside developers.
There was also this concept of agrihoods. I had never heard this term before.
Dirt has always equaled dollars. That's the old saying. But the new model is developing eco-retrofitted communities. Imagine a subdivision or a neighborhood that's built around a central community farm. It's solar-powered, it's health-focused.
It's a return to owning the land, but making it sustainable for the future. It's not just about speculation.
Exactly. It's moving from buy, hold, and rent out to creating a self-sustaining ecosystem. You grow your own food, you generate your own power, you educate your own kids on site. It reduces the reliance on external systems that might not have your best interests at heart.
You know, we've covered so much today. We started with that metaphor of the coolest house on the block that you don't actually own. We looked at the hard data, that 30-point housing gap, the $162 billion lost to property devaluation. We debunked the $2 trillion buying power myth. And we looked at the future of owning the digital pixels.
It's a lot to process, but the through line, the central theme is clear. Influence is seductive. It feels good to set the trend. It feels good to be the culture. But influence without control is precarious. It's fleeting.
It's rented power.
It is. And the transition we're seeing, or at least the transition we need to see, is from being the content creators to being the platform owners, from being the consumers to being the producers, from labor wealth to IP wealth.
So here's the final thought I want to leave you, our listener, with. We talk all the time about going viral. We chase the likes, the views, the attention. But generational wealth isn't built on views. It's built on deeds. It's built on patents. It's built on equity.
The question for the next decade isn't who is setting the trend. The question is, who owns the server the trend lives on?
That's the question. Who owns the server?
Yeah.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. We'll see you next time.
Take care.